This is part A, part one of the KhoodeelaarTV campaign, world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street, the so-called British media, printed from addresses in and around London. And the Daily Mail is running the front page. The second most prominent piece about the actress Kate Winslet, saying it felt so good to go nude again at 43. Now, this is objectifying woman because there is no similar, remotely similar piece about man in this edition of the Daily Mail or any edition of the Daily Mail. So this is completely corrupt and sexist. And the Daily Mail is not alone. The Guardian, which in fact shamelessly has become the Daily Mail in imitation, running a piece about Marianne Faithfull. Now, Marianne Faithfull also is objectified as a female, and there is nothing similar to that about men. And there is another woman who is objectified, in fact, in context. Now, this one has got several kind of unusual, uncommon things about the piece about her. And we shall be talking in a minute, literally in a minute, about Noor Inayat Khan. And this woman is being described as the daughter. Well, she was executed, murdered by the Nazis in 1943, I think. That is the year. And she is credited with playing vital role as a radio operator, that is the radio signals operator during the Second European War. And she sent vital information and data by radio signals to London, as the Guardian says, and it helped preparations for the D-Day landing. And it played a significant role. And this positive promotion, positive acknowledgement of this woman, who is Noor Inayat Khan, is the name, a Muslim name, and she is the daughter of a Muslim spiritual person. That's what it says. And for the last few decades, increasingly, there have been very positive references to Noor Inayat Khan. And she was murdered by the Nazis when she was aged 29. And there have been many items, all very positive, about Noor Inayat Khan. And most of the mentions about her have been in the context of women doing the service for the British side during the war and the role of the women. And whenever she has been mentioned also as the daughter of a Muslim kind of spiritual leader and a Muslim person, whether she practiced Islam is not mentioned, but that is what she has been described as. She has been described as mainly as a woman. So this is on page 3 of The Guardian, and it is full of ethnic tokenism and racist patronizing. And they've got a picture of this woman as Noor Inayat Khan, codenamed Madeline, and is described as being shot by the Nazis. So that's her picture. That is her picture, Noor Inayat Khan. And she's the subject of this item on page 3 of The Guardian by Dalia Albarj. And she is not called the daughter of a Muslim. She is called the daughter of an Indian Sufi mystic. Now, she is a Muslim or the daughter of a Muslim, but they are hiding. The Guardian is denying all of that. Because this promotion is all based on very positive kind of references to her, all in the context of the fact that she is talked about Asian women, not Muslim women. All of this Guardian piece is going out of its way to avoid mentioning the fact at any stage or the aspect of her being the daughter of a Muslim. So they're saying the story of the daughter of an Indian Sufi mystic who gave her life as a British secret agent fighting with the French resistance in the Second World War is to be dramatized in a major television series. Now, the headline is Slumdog star to play mystic's daughter who was wartime secret agent. This piece is classic racist Guardian stupidity and anti-Muslim hatred and idiocy. Because Slumdog star, Slumdog, the whole word Slumdog was created by a racist filmmaker doing a thing about Bombay or Mumbai or Mumbai. And since the the filmmakers and the promoters basked in the disgrace of the racist patronage, they've forgotten all about the poverty and the particular poverty suffered, endured even now, a decade or more later, by mainly Muslim migrants and people in the slums of Mumbai. So this one is Noor Inayat Khan, who was captured by the Gestapo and executed in Dachau concentration camp, will be portrayed by Frida Pinto, a slumdog millionaire star. Spy Princess is the name of the character. Will be directed by Anand Taka and produced by Andy Patterson, following their success with the Oscar and BAFTA nominated Girl with a Pearl hearing. Khan became the first female radio operator to be sent to Nazi-occupied France, sending vital messages back to London. She significantly aided the success of the Allied landing on D-Day. Codenamed Madeleine, she became a target for the Gestapo and was captured aged 29 in 1943. She was tortured before being shot in the head, having revealed nothing to her captors. Pinto, who is also executive producer of the series, described Khan as a fierce and amazing woman, the most unlikely heroine of the Second World War. And then they're admitting that she was herself a Sufi mystic. Sending women to the front line is controversial. Even now, Pinto said, sending a Sufi mystic who won't use a gun, the daughter of a long-haired Indian guru who preaches love and peace, ridiculous. But Noor thrives in spite of her differences, but because of them. Now they're calling her the daughter of a long-haired Indian guru. That is rubbish. They're again racistly and intentionally anti-Islamic way, refusing to refer to any aspect of Islam or the Muslim faith at all. That is the diagnosis of the racist anti-Muslim Guardian today, 15th of January 2021. So they are denying her the truth about her identity. They don't say anything about where she came from, that is to say, how she ended up in Britain, in London, before being sent to the Nazi-occupied France. And they're not talking about the migration. They're not talking about the empire at all. So this is not an accident. This is totally and absolutely typical norm of the racist Guardian and anti-Muslim Guardian and the imperialist lying Guardian. Anyone reading the Guardian or referring to the Guardian should be aware of this record, this content, this evidence. So in the entry on her on Wikipedia, they're saying that she was born on the 1st of January 1914 and she was murdered on 13th of September 1944. And she's given the other names, Nora Inayat Khan and Nora Baker, was a British spy in World War II who served in the Special Operations Executive. As a Special Operations Executive agent, she became the first female wireless operator to be sent from the UK into occupied France to aid the French resistance during World War II. Now, why they chose her instead of a white indigenous person. Is not explained or mentioned at all. But it is quite possible that she was used as a test, as a so-called guinea pig, in order to make sure that the indigenous white women were not exposed to uncertain risk. And she was therefore chosen. There is no other reason why the daughter of a Muslim should be the first to be sent there. Because there were indigenous white women employed as radio signals operators at the time that she was. And they're saying that she was born in Moscow. She died, the eldest of 4 children, born in Moscow. Her siblings were Vilayat, Hidayat, and Khairun Nisa. Khairun Nisa lived a long life, only dying in 2011, according to this entry. And this is the first time they're mentioning in the early life section in the paragraph 2. Her father, Inayat Khan, came from a family of Indian Muslims. They should say that family of Muslims in British occupied subcontinent of India. There were hereditary nobles and musicians on both sides of her parentage. His great-great-grandfather was the ruler of Mysore, Tipu Sultan. He lived in Europe as a musician and a teacher of Sufism. So her mother, Pirani Amina Begum, Pirani is the female of Pir or Sufi, born Ora Ray Baker, was an American from Albarak, New Mexico, who met Inayat Khan during his travels in the United States. Ora Baker was the half-sister of American yogi and scholar Pierre Bernard, her guardian at the time she met Inayat. Vilayat later became head of the Sufi Order of the West, later renamed the Sufi Order International, and now the Inayati Order. In 1914, shortly before the outbreak of the First World War, the family left Russia for London and lived in Bloomsbury. Noor attended nursery in Notting Hill. In 1920, they moved to France, settling in a town called Suresnes, or however the French pronunciation is, which is a place near Paris, in a house that was a gift from a benefactor of the Sufi movement. So it seems that the family of Noor Inayat Khan lived in various parts of Europe, especially in France. And she was a studious, intelligent, thoughtful person who looked after the family which was grief-stricken after the death of her father. And she was non-violent. The whole list of the aspects of her life before she joined the British war is accessible on the internet as an entry in the Wikipedia. And the Wikipedia mentions her being a Muslim, but it's not recognized in The Guardian, and it's not recognized in most of the references about her that have been published in Britain in the last 30 years. And the fact that she's a Muslim is very important because Muslims are along the same time of the last 30 years are referred to and kind of misrepresented as a violent faith, violent in the context of the supposed peace-loving West. And the evidence shows that one of the reasons why the Muslims have been targeted and maligned in the last 30 years is to do with the need to demonize and malign the Muslims for purely economic grounds, quite apart from the other reasons, because the Muslim people own the land under which most of the world's oil reserves are and have been. And the oil has been the main reason why the regime, like the Saudis, have been cultivated by the various Western regimes and big business. And those countries and those regimes and those kind of political personalities in the Muslim countries that have not been cultivated and tolerated by the Western big business and regimes have coincidentally have less control on the wealth. Not necessarily all of them, because in Iraq there is a lot of Iraqi control, and the Iraqi oil, there is a lot of it. So here they actually murdered Saddam Hussein, whereas in the period before they used Saddam Hussein to cause the murders of millions of Iraqi and Iranian so-called fighters fighting one another. So the violence has been created by the big business, military industrial complex, and imperialist robbers of the West, from the West. And the Muslim so-called leaders and thinkers have failed, totally failed, to point this out. And the so-called socialists, leftists in the West have never concealed their ignorance and contempt of the Muslims. And we shall be talking more about that in the context of the need to denuclearize the world in due course. So Noor Inayat Khan is being given a totally, overwhelmingly Indian kind of characterization. But the Indian characterization that they are doing, The Guardian, is not exceptional. The Guardian has, over the last 75 years, systematically, regularly demonized the Muslims of the subcontinent since 1947 and has given a very positive gloss to the anti-Muslim forces and has suppressed the attacks and violations on Muslims in the Republic of India today. So, what is the impact and the implication of the promotion for this Indian image, slumdog, and the British female spy that the Nazis, the Gestapo, executed in 1944? The implication is that contains about 100 different elements of anti-Muslim agenda in operation by the British media, the Fleet Street, and the Guardian in particular, because the Guardian has got about 3 or 4 Indian origin writers, regular writers, but none given a comparable slot to a Muslim person. I'm not saying that the people who are of Indian origin are necessarily representing anti-Muslim attitude. What I'm saying is that the absence of Muslims on the Guardian in a similar way shows something working there that leaves the Muslims out of the Guardian as writers, commentators, whatever. And this actually is borne out by the claims made by Suzanne Moore, how the Guardian is a creepy organization, like she was edited by creeps. Her so-called controversial views and opinions, which I'm not representing or speaking of on behalf of or in support of, just referring very distinctly the factual evidence that she has brought out about the way the Guardian lies and hides the truth and suppresses the views surreptitiously, creepily, immorally, unethically, and without accountability and without telling the writer and author and source of the opinion or piece. Suzanne Moore has, of course, been now launched as a columnist on the Boris Graph. It's nothing to do with Suzanne Moore being a supporter of Boris Johnson. It's being evidence, or one of the items of evidence, of the commercial rivalry between the Boris Graph and the Guardian, and the political advantage that the Boris Graph is hoping to reap by exposing the Guardian's own dishonesty and corruption. Now, the Guardian's anti-Muslim role and record is absolutely accessible on every occasion. And when they had a columnist called James Cameron, the Guardian had a columnist called James Cameron, who made too much of the fact that Cameron was married to a woman from India, or an Indian woman, or a Sikh woman, or a Hindu woman, probably not a Muslim. And the fact that he made that kind of assertion and claims is connected to the fact that he was a rampant, raging anti-Muslim. This same Cameron had a slot on the BBC radio, and in one radio comment, the BBC radio broadcast that comment, He said that when he went to Oxford Street in London, he couldn't hear English being spoken or words to that effect. Our movement immediately condemned that at the time, which was a few decades ago, because this racist, anti-Muslim James Cameron died quite a while ago. Now, that was not an exceptional opinion. That was not a rare opinion held by that was not a rare anti-Muslim opinion held by somebody connected with the Guardian. For example, when the earthquake happened in Pakistan, killing a large number of people, the Guardian chose not to run that story. There was no competing international, objectively defined item that could possibly have any bigger claim than the news that a very large number of people had been killed in an earthquake that had hit Pakistan or a country. They would never have done that if the earthquake had hit Nepal, say, which is a small country, or Sri Lanka. But they did. And what the Guardian did at the time was to put a piece about spying, espionage, on the front page about China. There is no competition. There is absolutely no competition, no reason other than the fact that the Guardian wanted to deny, was continuing to be in denial about the casualties in the earthquake that had hit so many Muslims. Pakistan, of course, is a population predominantly Muslim, but there are Christians, there are many Hindus and Sikh people there. So it is possible that the victims of the earthquake on that occasion included people from Christian, Hindu, Sikh religions and backgrounds. But the predominant majority of the victims would be Muslims. And the Guardian was doing that. The Guardian was denying that. And when the Saitan Rushdie was launched as the most effective propaganda weapon by the British, the Guardian played the main leading part in pseudo-intellectualism, in pseudo kind of exposure of the Muslim radicalism and Muslim propensity to violence. There is no evidence that idea, the Muslims were a community prone to more violence, outrages among themselves than any other comparably identifiable, religiously identifiable community of any background. So as I said before, it was a target. Muslims were a target for economic reasons, imperialist reasons, and they did that targeting based entirely on the economic gains that they could make by marginalizing and depriving the targeted populations or targeted parts of the populations. They didn't target the Saudi regime. They didn't target the Jordanian kind of regime or similar other regimes that had prevailed. They targeted the Muslims also partly because of the Iranian Revolution that took place while it removed Reza Shah Pahlavi from his so-called throne. And despite the fact that Tariq Ali, who comes from Pakistan, claims to be a socialist, he has always been a very effective kind of source of anti-Pakistan, that is anti-Muslim country Pakistan kind of narrative. And he has never been held to account for his lying and his incitement to hatred against Islam and Pakistan in that context. It doesn't have to be Pakistan, it could be Afghanistan, which has happened, of course, could be Iran, could be other Muslim majority countries or societies. So, for example, The Guardian has got more space, disproportionately more space against Turkey when it reports about Armenia and the atrocities done to the Armenian people by the Turks historically, than it does have anything to do with the current and ongoing persecution of Muslims, say, for example, including in China and by China. And in India, which is a Hindu majority kind of country, the number of Muslims is huge, 300 million. And that is more than the entire population of the Western European countries put together. And the Muslims, as I said before, and the Dalits, the untouchables so-called, are being treated brutally and without basic human rights across India. Even a fraction of that kind of violation based on faith of the Hindus, say, or the Brahmins. The question doesn't even arise about the Brahmins, but if the Hindus were treated by a Muslim country in that way, The Guardian would run that as a new crusade. So what I'm saying is that The Guardian is part of the problem in the festering, lying Fleet Street. Problem caused to the telling of the truth in the world and about the world. And it has been so. Reading The Guardian, that was called most of the times Manchester Guardian during the British Empire, we have references to Muslims and the Hindus and Brahmins and others. And The Guardian is very much anti-Muslim throughout in those stories and those times. And when Monica Ali, the white daughter of an alleged Bengali, not Siloti, Bengali father, was launched to update Saitan Rushdie narrative against Muslims, they chose the Muslims of Tower Hamlets in the Brick Lane area. And they completely left any pretense about objectivity. The Guardian gave the Monica Ali story the kind of ferocious anti-Muslim and anti-Siloti and anti-Bangladeshi promotion that it has never given to any other racist cause, anti-Muslim, apart from anti-Muslim, and any other cause that is racist but is aimed at people from other backgrounds, religious background, ethnic background, so-called nationality background. And they stole the real name of Brick Lane, and they openly carried out the distortion, openly, without any pretense that they were not doing it. They actually they superimposed the fiction on the reality. and they did the vice versa. They superimposed the reality on the fiction, and they completely created a very corrupt image of the people of Brick Lane. Now, they did that in the first decade of this century, during the first half, the first 5 years of the 21st century. And Tower Hamlets Council collaborated, and was complicit in the distortion when they wanted to make a film. And just like the Slumdog Millionaires, they went to West Bengal. They didn't go to Bangladesh. Remember, this is Bangladeshi community in Tower Hamlets in Brick Lane, has always been. Bangladeshi, that is the same area, the Siloti speaking people, even when the British were still the colonial kind of controllers of the subcontinent, the people that lived in Brick Lane came from the same area, Silot. Anglicized spelling is S for sugar, Ylet, Silet. So they stole the identity of the people, the culture, the history, and they fabricated a totally racistly, anti-Islamically, anti-Muslim narrative on the image of the Silotis and the Bangladeshis by paying nearly £1 million altogether, the Guardian and the actual launchers, the American launchers of Monica Ali. Altogether, they paid her nearly £1 million, and she was nothing before them. And they paid her in advance £500,000 or something like that. That figure, of course, is not accurate. It is subject to checking. But they paid hundreds of thousands of pounds in advance. And what she produced was neither literature, nor documentary, nor history, and most certainly was part of the same narrative that Satan Rushdie was used to promote and kind of recycle. I have done a number of programs on Channel 4 television, and most of them were done during the late 1980s and the 1990s. I have not done anything during this century, and I shall come to the reason in due course. Not necessarily this part, but I will in due course. And all my kind of contents that I created for the broadcast that were not documentary kind of length, not half an hour length, but they were shorter, but all of them were consistently diagnostic against the role, anti-Muslim, anti-Bangladeshi, racist role that the Channel 4 television was being misused for. And one of the main ones concerned, not because as I have said, I've done quite a number. All of those were written by me at extremely fast speed, and I had to fight. Each time I had to fight the individuals involved in producing the particular program. and I did the factual programs mainly. And all of those were, in one way or another, in part or in whole, challenging the general narrative of the Channel 4 television documentaries, factuals, and the news programs. And of course, I did the slot that used to be broadcast after the 7 o'clock news on Channel 4 before. If there is an equivalent slot now, it's nothing comparable to what they actually did when they first started airing it. It was much more rigorous than whatever is available on Channel 4 now, or has been available from the beginning of this century. And the slot item I did in January in 1992 about the migration from Africa and Asia and the poor countries into the West. And I did that in January 1992 when it was the turn of the United Nations General Assembly to be presided over by the UK. And John Major was about to go to New York and address the United Nations General Assembly on behalf of the UK as the president of the Assembly that session. So I addressed John Major in that particular piece that I wrote. Why I'm saying that? Because I have not said it just once. I have said it a dozen times on this channel, and also published dozens of pieces about that particular broadcast. Because I remain the only broadcaster, the only person who said what I said in that particular piece, which lasted a few minutes. And it is worth trillions of pounds, trillions of dollars. Why? Because I addressed the hunger and the poverty and the famine and the massacre in the originating countries in the West, in Africa and in Asia mainly, from where most of the migrants seeking food and shelter came from. And I said in January 1992 that John Major should be focusing in his speech and his kind of role at the United Nations, focusing attention on creating or helping to create a permanent way, forum through the United Nations to address all the factors that cause poverty in those countries, in the African continent, in the Asian continent. And I warned that if the poverty creation and causing of poverty and hunger and famine and genocide were not addressed materially, then there would be very large numbers of people from Africa and Asia in years to come who would be seen as a catastrophe for the West, by the West. Now, this is what has happened. And the catastrophe is ongoing now. And the fact that the catastrophe of poverty and hunger and famine is not being treated in anywhere nearly as seriously by the United Nations as the pandemic is not to say that the catastrophe is not ongoing. So we'll be updating on this commentary and this diagnosis in due course. But I have to say that the reason I'm saying about this is that the Guardian didn't and has never published anything remotely like what I said about poverty and hunger and famine and destitution and the migration. Of course, I wrote that piece in a matter of minutes in January 1992, shortly before, unknown to me, I had to launch the campaign in defense of the parents and the parent governors in a school in the London borough of Newham, located in the Stratford area. That was January 1992. So from January 1992 to February, March, April, up to May, there was a very serious season of campaign activities mobilized by me while I was walking around, because I didn't have an office and I didn't have any resources. So everything I did was based on the available resources that I could use. And the most important resources were the resources of the evidence, the facts and the evidence, and the morality and the ethics, and the sheer evidential strength. From January 1992 to January 2002, 2012, and this is now just under 30 years. Just under 30 years. This January, today is the 15th of January, 2021. What have I been doing on all these issues in those years, in those decades, actually constitutes evidence of world exclusive intellectual, evidential, factual, ethical, moral, democratic, legal, lawful work. Now, The Guardian chose to publish a profile on me in March 1992. And at the beginning of the profile, they said that I was comparable to, I was like a hero in a R.K. Narayan novel. Now they said that in the beginning of the piece. If I was a hero or like a hero in an R.K. Narayan book or fiction, they managed to reduce me to the opposite by the end of the profile. Hilarious, absolutely typical, and world exclusive. Again, The Guardian did a world exclusive profile of me, which remains a world exclusive evidence item of racism, stupidity, and corruption by The Guardian to this day, just 29 years on. I shall be discussing that at length again in context. And this woman who wrote that piece is now The Guardian's so-called health editor, Sarah Bosley. Now, Sarah Bosley, if she is the health editor of The Guardian, God help us. Because if she couldn't get, she taped a conversation with me on the telephone. If she couldn't get that right, whatever else she's writing about the pandemic as the so-called health editor must be being done in the way that Suzanne Moore was done by The Guardian's varieties and various stages of editors. So when I say this is the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street, I'm very hands-on, very directly involved at various levels. That too, that involvement remains world exclusive as well. And the other world exclusive fact about my empirical records is that when I was doing the real work as the chief political writer on a national newspaper in Pakistan before 1971. That was in Dhaka, not in West Pakistan, which is now Pakistan. I did that before I did publish in another national newspaper. I did that both those jobs without asking for money or being offered any money for my work by the people who controlled and owned the two titles that I'm referring to here. Now that is not common, that is not found anywhere. And the reason why I did that was clearly intentional on my part. That if I wrote anything in return for any amount of money, then I could not write freely what I wanted to write. So that was not possible for the owners and the controllers of these titles to do with my writing. So I published what I thought factually and evidentially was the truth and needed to be, and the truth that needed to be written and published, which I did. And I did the same thing with other publications. And I wrote many thousands of pieces. And I didn't get a single penny, let alone thousands of pounds. So if all the work that I have actually written and published are added together, and they are kind of treated for earnings by the length of the article, by the number of the words, and treated under the 2001 prices, as they say, then I would have been owned, and I would have owned, and I would have owed payments in the hundreds of millions, if not more than £1 billion in the years that I have been writing on public, social, humanitarian, evidential, economic issues. So on byline, if you like, bylined earnings, I have been owed billions of pounds. Now, fast forward to today, the 15th of January 2021, and consider the brains, or the place where the brain should be, of the woman called Leslie Jones or something, who is supposedly the editor of the Newham Recorder and the Docklands and East London Idiotizer and the Hackney Gazette. To her, there is no news, there is no evidence, there is no campaign, there is no substance to anything, unless the person being given the byline or the item being published can be shown to have been written by someone who is officially contracted to the newspaper or employed by the newspaper. That's the criteria, not the evidence. Remember, not the evidence, not the facts, not the corroboration, not the research, not the impact or the implication, but the fact of this person being employed by the employers of this series of titles called the Newham Recorder, Hackney Gazette, and Docklands and East London Idiotizer. Think about that. Stupidity doesn't do it. Calling Leslie Jones an idiot doesn't do justice to the injustices that she personifies, embodies, and the denials that she personifies and embodies. So that's the level and the depth of the idiocy of the people editing most of the local and regional and non-Fleet Street titles. But they have one thing in common: they are all idiots and deniers and liars and racists. So what is happening in the rest of the Fleet Street papers, for example? Boris Graf is running, again, a very unlikely story. Which is that shocking care home outbreaks at levels not seen since first peak of the pandemic in Britain. Now this is very, very significant, because this actually exposes the negligence and the cruelty and the lack of fitness on the part of Boris Johnson. But they're not saying that. They're depersonalizing that and detaching and separating it from Boris Johnson's incumbents as the so-called prime minister that they created. And they're saying cases have more than trebled in a month as vaccine rollout hits unexpected delays. And they've given the piece the byline of Sarah Napton, science editor, and Camilla Tomini. Now, Camilla Tomini is the poison. Camilla Tomini is the poisonous person. She can be compared with Alison Pearson and some other women that are given platforms on Fleet Street papers. And she can be compared back to the Daily Express's Jean Rook of the 1970s and 1980s. Now these are women that, all of them are white women, of course, not like the Sufi daughter of the Sufi Muslim guru who they call Indian guru. They are unanimous in their hostility to Muslims, they're racist, and they're in utter denial of the fact that there was an empire. So what can they be expected to write? They cannot be expected to write the truth. And Camilla Tomini, who speaks with abject disregard for the truth, like Andrew Pierce, described as an associate editor on the Daily Mail group, does. It's Andrew Pierce on the Daily Mail Camilla Tomini on the Daily Boris Graph, and Libby Pabers, who used to present the Radio 4 program, Women's Hour or Midweek. Whether she does currently or not, I have to check. So these are people that are brazen liars and defiers of common sense, common ethics, common morality, and common social responsibility, ethical duty. To paraphrase the Nobel Prize awarded Bengali poet Rabindranath Tagore, when he wrote a short piece about what a library is. His first Bengali language paragraph began, I am speaking from memory, মহাসমুদ্রের শতবৎসরের কল্লোল কেহ যদি এমন করিয়া বাঁধিয়া রাখিতে পারিত. That is to say, if it was possible for anyone to encapsulate, put in a capsule, the ripples of 100 years, the ripples of the Pacific Ocean, Mahasamudra, big ocean. If the ripples of 100 years of the Pacific Ocean could be put in a capsule, then that could be said to represent a part of what a library is. And then he gave other examples of what a library is. So to paraphrase him, if it were possible to put together, to paraphrase him and scale it down for obvious numerical reasons and temporal reasons, if it were possible to put in a particular sentence the lies that the Fleet Street writers and columnists and commentators have been perpetrating and perpetuating and repeating and kind of retailing for hundreds of years, 219 years, let's say, or 220 calendar years since the first newspaper, so-called, was published, then it could be said to be found in a column by, let's say, Camilla Tomini or Jean Rook or Alison Pearson or Katie Hopkins. Now these are criminals against the truth. And the criminals are perpetrating crimes by distorting intentionally, doing daylight robbery against the truth, hijacking the truth. And of the millions of people that are supposed to be their readers and fans, there doesn't seem to be a single one who is making any traction in opposition to the lies and the liars. Which is why the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street is needed by the world. Because quite apart from the real contents of the Fleet Street papers, the phrase Fleet Street is still actively symbolic in the sense that its equivalent, the British press, is used to this day to paint the image to Africa and Asia and other places, even in Britain as well, of a platform collectively, the Fleet Street or the British press, that is morally legitimate and evidentially superior to anything else that might exist anywhere on the planet Earth, which is an image that is completely untrue, unsubstantiated, and cannot be matched to the reality. As we said, the main basis of Fleet Street is Little England. They don't even recognize the existence of the rest of the United Kingdom, which altogether is only a few islands. The main one is the mainland of England, Wales, Cornwall, Scotland, and then there are smaller islands around. And then, of course, the island of Ireland, which is divided into UK part, UK occupied part, and the independent part of the Republic of Ireland. The Republic of Ireland is a part and parcel of the European Union. And the mess that the succession of incumbents as prime ministers at number 10 Downing Street have made about the UK's position, let's say post 1947, because nothing in size or in impact compares to the events of 1947 in the official departure of the British imperialists from the subcontinent. Nothing has been seen anywhere in the last 500 years that is comparable to that. Not even the creation of the United States of America, independent of Britain. Nothing that happened in France in the Revolution, not far apart from the creation of the United States of America. Nothing compares to the impact and the implications of the British imperialists in the subcontinent. And there is no evidence in Fleet Street. Has been no evidence, is no evidence of the Fleet Street, the writers, the editors, the commissioners, the proprietors, even bothering to update the so-called readers on what happened in 1947 and what has been happening following 1947 and what had happened prior to 1947. So when the Guardian on page 3 today run this anti-Muslim stupid piece about the daughter of an Indian guru, Noor Inayat Khan, the Guardian is perpetuating Sikh-making lies and denials. Racist, ignorant. So therefore, what they have done needs to be made clear to the people who refer to the Guardian unquestioningly or with, quote, respect. The Guardian doesn't warrant respect whatsoever. The Guardian got a veneer, the kind of image of being less brazenly racist, less brazenly corrupt, and less brazenly controlled than any of the other titles in Fleet Street. But that's it. That's a pretense. That's not the reality. That's the facade, which is why we have to do the world exclusive diagnosis, because nobody else is doing it. And if the guardian is not exposed, nobody else will be exposing it. And the Times, that is owned by the Times is talking about, is also controlled and owned by Rupert Murdoch, whose son James Murdoch is teaming up with a big business network in India to recapture the market that they lost when the team was broken. That is not in the Times, but that is in the Boris Club, I think. Let's see. And the Boris graph is actually reporting a stupid item, which is saying that US advertisers have pulled $10 million from Facebook. Now, Facebook controllers, Mark Zuckerberg, who aided and abetted Donald Trump for 5 years, personally owns hundreds of billions of dollars. So the advertisers pulling $10 million worth of advertisements is not a news item at all. And they've got a piece about Facebook, and they're basing it on technological intelligence, and they're saying that there is a tool that has been developed that is serving as an antidote to Facebook. We shall be talking about that in due course, either later in this program or this part, or another time. Now, here is a piece that is also published in other Fleet Street papers today. It's a man offering a council £55 million to dig up bitcoins. Now, what it is saying is that putting a receipt needed for a refund out with the rubbish is a nuisance. A hard drive with the keys to a potential fortune of £230 million going the same way is rather worse. James Howells, age 35, a computer engineer from Newport, South Wales, is pleading with his local council to allow him to dig up a landfill site to find a drive he says contains 7,500 bitcoins that he was given in 2013. We'll stop there. It's one drive. So if one drive is worth or contains wealth and resources valued at £230 million, then what would be the worth of thousands of drives? Think about that. This is a reference to the damage caused to our campaign and our movement by the criminals who mounted the attack on the Kitten's house in Brick Lane in 2012. We have referred to this many times before, and we shall refer to this many times in the future. But this is the kind of value and worth that is involved. And we are only talking about one set of attacks mounted on the Kitten's house in Brick Lane in 2012. And the target of the attacks, combined target of the attacks, has been our property. Now there were at least 20 other attacks on our resources in the decades prior to that. So combine that and use the 2020-21 crisis as the Times piece about this Welsh computer technical person is using, and it would come to trillions. That is what we have said already many times in the past. Trillions. And we have outstanding claims against the London Borough of Tower Hamlets Council, against the London Borough of Newham Council, and we have got similar claims going back at least 60 years. And dating way back to years when there was not even fax machines. And we are referring to original works, theses, scripts, manuscripts, covering all known disciplines of thought. And referring to and relating to sources, authoring, writing that relates to all the continents on the planet Earth. And there is, it seems, no end to the kind of willingness on the part of Fleet Street to give a sympathetic kind of platform as compared to thousands of people in comparably more serious situations. We are talking about the platforms being given to what they call devastated Katie Price. They got on the front page, the splash. Said Katie, why I am putting Harvey in care. Now, Katie Price is one of the dozens of successful kind of entrepreneurs who mounted their career brazenly capitalizing on the actual and potential aspects of their physique. Katie Price hit the public as Jordan, boasting of her clearly artificially boosted bosoms or bosom, which have undergone several treatments. That is objective in the rawest sense of the word. And the Sun newspaper made Murdoch billions of pounds by objectifying women based on their breasts and the rest of their naked bodies. And Murdoch became a billionaire based on the fact that the scum was allowed to do that. And it was allowed to do that by the gullibles, the millions of gullibles who bought the objectified images in the millions for decades. And there is no diagnosis of that. There is no analysis of that, let alone any rejection of that, let alone any opposition to that by any part of the rest of the Fleet Street or of the political so-called system or a parliament or the opinion makers and formers. Katie Price has not contributed to any opposition to the objectifying of the woman's body. She has profited from that, and she continues to profit from that, including in parts of this particular item and plea. And despite the fact that, as we said yesterday, the Private Eye magazine pretends to run a section. It's longer than a page, so it's a section called the Street of Shame, which is supposed to be a rigorous analysis of the role and the behavior and the dishonesty of the Fleet Street papers, despite the fact that it pretends that section to be that. It isn't that. And it is never, ever examining the collusion by the likes of Katie Price with the brazen, objective exploitation of the woman's body. And despite the fact that the page 3 was the target of a belated campaign that included Claire Short, the former MP, the arguments against the objectification of the woman's body have not been aired in any way audibly for a very long time. And that can be kind of equally applicable to the silence in Fleet Street and in Parliament and in the UK institutions of so-called education, the universities, on the other major issues of racism, empire, imperialism, colonialism, and the rest of it. And the fact that even today's papers are doing the propaganda for Boris Johnson and his regime about the pandemic. There is nothing in the actual copy in any of the papers about what the virus is doing to the person affected. Remember what we've been saying, A to Z of the behavior of the virus, not the behavior of the propagandists who are issuing contradictory sets of propaganda statistics and numbers every day. For example, this is a huge splash on the Daily Mirror, which is supposed to be critical of the Tory government, but it's carrying out the same agenda that suits the Tory government's denial, being in denial. So we shall be continuing. This is one first part A of the diagnosis, world diagnosis of the Fleet Street Papers, and it is ending at just 1 hour 20 minutes, 10:21 GMT.